It is such a pleasure to have you all in attendance for the first event of our summer series. Today, we will be hearing from Karen Gaia Pitts and Joshua Mirondo from Transition Earth. Karen has been involved with the population movement since the 90s, serving on the Sierra Club Volunteer Committee for over 10 years to steer their population program. For the past 5 years, she has served as Transition Earth's project coordinator, where she spearheaded the Maasai Harmonial Development and Sustainability Project, which we will be learning a lot more about today. And then we have Joshua, who is a graduate of Uganda Christian University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in public administration and management. Since 2015, he's been a part of Reproductive Health Uganda's communications team, serving as a community-based repro health trainer and peer educator. He also volunteers with Transition Earth and will be providing us an on-the-ground perspective on the state of Uganda's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Again, thank you to both of our speakers for being here today and sharing your incredible work with our members. Joshua, you can go ahead and take it away. The floor is yours.
Yes, hi everyone. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you. Can hear you, Josh.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Joshua Mirondo, and I am a writer at Transition Earth Uganda, but Transition Earth. But besides that, I am a Ugandan citizen. I stay in Uganda. I am a communicator. I'm a digital marketer. Just like what she introduced, just giving a brief background. And I've been in the communications, especially in the sexual and reproductive health field. And I'll be presenting climate change and women's rights in Uganda. Next slide. Yeah. Just a little bit of the background of women's rights. These are rights and entitlements claimed for women and girls worldwide. They are formed on the basis of women's rights movement, and this backs in the 19th century, and it was really supported mainly by feminist movement in the 20th and 21st century. So the women's rights have not, in the first place, they were not so much respected until feminist movements came up and started standing up for the rights, and up to now, they are one of the movements that are at the forefront of fighting for women's rights. So in some countries, these rights are really institutionalized and are supported by the law, local custom, and behavior, whereas in others, as we will be exploring this slide, in other countries, these rights have been ignored and suppressed. Also these human rights, they differ. The women's rights differ from border of notions of human rights through the claims and inheritance, historical and traditional bias against the exercise of the rights by women and girls in favor of men and boys. So we find that in the beginning, and some of the books that we've been reading over time, we find that there has been a coexisting patriarchy. And then until the women's rights, the women's movements and feminists came into play, that's when many countries started recognizing that women should be represented in parliament, different parliaments, in different positions of power. But back in the days, there is a way women were thrown under the bus. Next slide. Yes. Now on the brief background about women's rights in Uganda. The women's rights we have laws and legislations that have been designed to protect the women's rights, and these laws have been put in place to ensure that the physical, mental, and economic well-being of women is really catered for. And the legislatures, the different members of parliament and different committees have gone ahead to design several laws, and these laws have been designed specifically to protect women's rights in Uganda. For instance, there is a 2009 Persons Act, or you can call it the Anti-Trafficking Act. And now this one, the Anti-Trafficking Act prevents all forms of human trafficking, like anything related to human trafficking. But then realize that most of the human trafficking that was happening before this law was put in place, it was against women. So women were taken to other countries to do slavery when most of them didn't have they didn't have legal documents that enabled them to work in those countries. So they are taken to maybe the United Arab Emirates. Many companies are taking women there, and then their passports are removed from them, and then others are trafficked within East Africa. They're transported to Kenya, and yeah. So this law is put in place to stop this. However, as time goes by, these act has continued to happen in Uganda, but we really have a law that is against anti-trafficking. Then you also have the 2010 Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Act. So this one, the FGM Act, or the Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Act of 2010, it's a comprehensive law and it's against FGM. So it clearly defines that female genital mutilation is a crime from the performance, procurement, attempting, or aiding any form of practice that results into FGM. It's really, really prohibited. Then we also have the 2011 Domestic Violence Regulations Act, and because in Uganda, women are the victims of gender-based violence mainly, and then most of the men are perpetrators, although some of the women are the perpetrators, but the biggest percentage of the perpetrators are the men. So this 2011 Domestic Violence Regulation and Sexual Offences Bill was put to protect women against gender-based violence. So as women who have sought for help in case their rights have been violated by virtue of being female, they have a bill that protects them. So we also have the Equal Opportunities Commission Act of 2007, and this it was put because most of women were being women's rights were being violated because by virtue of their sexual orientation, by virtue of being women, or by their gender. So this act was put to permit the state to punish small groups or individuals that violate women's rights based on their gender. Next slide. Yes, so if we check out the relationship between climate change and women's rights. So now the background that I was giving you of the women's rights in Uganda, I've given it to you to show you that on paper and on ground, Uganda has very good laws that favor women. We have a lot of laws and acts, then bills that favor women. However, as we go on, realize that most of these are on paper. There is laxity of the law, whereby some of the offenses reported to the police, action is not taken immediately. And sometimes if action is taken, the police is easily bribed. And then also communities, like we have we have a lot of patriarchy in Uganda, whereby a woman cannot stand up for their rights. Most of the women cannot speak in public. Most of the women are not allowed to own property. So these laws are existing, but because of the patriarchy and society, and then the culture in Uganda, because in Uganda you have over 50 tribes, and Uganda is not a very big country, it's a very small country, and you have over 50 tribes. So every region you go to has their customs and norms. And then every region treats women differently, but then most of them do not, the cultures that are in each region, most of them do not favor women. So you find that many of them, for example, when it comes to female genital mutilation, which happens it happens a lot in the Sabini region, which is the Sabini region is in the eastern part of Uganda, especially in the district called Kapchora. This happens, however, we have realized that some of the women, even women who are educated, whom we call elites, have gone ahead to encourage female genital mutilation because culture says that if a girl doesn't undergo FGM, she is not a woman enough. So these laws are existing. However, people pass behind and practice things that are contrary to the law, and then they walk away with it because of the laxity into implementation. So the laws are there, the acts are there, the bills are there, but they are not enforced. So when we are relating climate change and women's rights in Uganda, so I find that majority of these policies have been put in place, but comprehensively they have failed to be effective. For instance, there is a land policy of 2013 in Uganda that permits everyone to own land equally, whether you're a man or a woman. However, we find that women do not own a lot of property in Uganda. And then this comes to a point of Uganda has a lot of agriculturists. Many Ugandans practice farming, but this farming is mainly practiced by women. However, the farming that is mostly practiced by women is mainly subsistent because women are more like breadwinners in families. So because men usually do not pay attention to families because all they do is most of the men, especially in the rural areas, they can wake up, go out, and then come back in the evening expecting to find food on the table. And then the women who are breadwinners have to look after all the families. Because if you take an example of, if you put yourself in the shoes of a woman in Uganda, in a rural area in Uganda, this woman wakes up in the morning, has to look after kids, and then after preparing the kids, after maybe preparing breakfast for the kids, maybe those who go to school, the kids that go to school, but some of the kids don't go to school, maybe they go with them to the garden, but this is after waking up very early and making sure that there is food in the morning before maybe they leave to go to each place, to whichever place they're going to. And then even upon return, the women are supposed to make sure that there is food when they return from the gardens, wherever they go to, and then making sure that the children in the right positions where they're supposed to do, making sure that children eat food. So when you look at the men, all they do is going maybe to the nearest trading center to work or going to drink, then they come back in the evening. So the women have a heavy workload on them, which is not the same as the men. Most of the men do not have a lot of things to do. When it comes to when we leave the rural women, even the men in the urban areas, they do not pay attention to the nitty-gritties that are happening in the family. So these women have a heavy workload on them. So the land tenure system that was established in 2013, it gives women and men equal opportunities to own land. But then you find that women own, women own, most of the women do not own land, like 60%, 61.3% of the women do not possess land in Uganda. However, the law says that this land should be shared equally. But why is it that even if we have a law that exists and says that land should be shared equally between men and women, why are we having 61% of the women not owning land? It's because of the culture and patriarchy that is surrounding ownership of property in Uganda. So even some of the land that is owned, whereby they practice subsistence farming, some of the land is leased to them, some of them just hire it. Some of the land belongs to the family. However, they don't have full possession. They cannot freely practice whatever they want to be practiced. And then this does not only happen in the rural areas, it also happens in the urban areas. For instance, we recently had a prime minister who died. He's called the late Professor Apollon Sibambi. When he was dying, he wrote a will and he gave his daughter all the property. However, because he had died, the family members said that in the clan, in their tradition, no woman is supposed to head a family. Even if the father had written a will, the traditional leaders say that even if the will is in existence, yes, we understand that the law permits someone to own property after their name was included in the will, but traditionally, we don't accept this. So you find that this patriarchy and social norms have gone from the past and they are being carried on into the future. Then climate change also increases gender inequality and reduces women's ability to be financially independent and has an overall negative impact on the social and political rights of women. So just like what I told you earlier, that women do not own the biggest percentage of the land, and most of the work they do, they are doing it to support the families. So when it comes back to how it increases gender inequality, now most of the farming that is done by the women, it's basically subsistence. So subsistence is mainly providing support to the family, making sure that there is food at home. So basically, women are breadwinners. And then when it comes to men are doing a lot of things, and then they have not been so supportive when it comes to families, just like what I've explained earlier. So we find that women have been drained, and because they carry out subsistence, most of the things that they carry out are to support family, they have been financially drained and they cannot be financially independent. So because the things they do is just to support family, the financial dependence in them has really bridged the gap between them and the men. So you find that they have to rely on men to ensure that at least they have something in their pockets. Yet men have not been so supportive when it comes to financially giving support to the women. Then also we have a lot of we have something called gender roles, whereby culturally or traditionally or socially, they believe that a woman is not supposed to do this, a woman is not supposed to enter a certain position of power, a woman is not supposed to be a cultural leader. So these gender roles have bridged also a gap between the men and women, and they have put men at a higher place compared to women. Yeah, so so these are some of the issues that are the climate change issues that are affecting women's rights in Uganda. Next slide. Yeah, so a lot of things had been done before. Yes, the law are existing. However, the government had done some sensitization. There are a number of NGOs that are also doing sensitization in the villages. Some of them are practicing what they call gender mainstreaming to ensure that boys are brought up knowing that they have to respect women's rights. However, as all this was happening, trying to make sure that women's rights are respected, women's rights are protected and all that, the pandemic happened. So last year, on 22nd March, the government announced a total lockdown. So the total lockdown meant that there are no movements. Everyone was supposed to be confined in their respective homes, and then children were back from school. Men were no longer working. Women who are breadwinners were all confined in homes. So people were looking at each other. So the stay-at-home restrictions and many measures have contributed to gender-based violence in various communities and homes. So, for instance, when you take an example of girls or children who used to be at school, children in Uganda spend most of their times at school compared to the time that they spend at home. So they spend around 3 months. One term is like 3 months each term. Annually, in Uganda, we have our education system permits 3 terms in a year in each class that someone is in. So each term has 3 months. So now they go to school for 3 months, and a good number of them are in boarding school. So they go to school for 3 months, then they have holidays for around 1 month. Then after they go back for the second term of the year, again for 3 months, then they come back for 1 month, then they go back to school for another 3 months. So you find that in a year, children spend around 3 or 4 months with their parents. But now when the pandemic happened, children were going to be at home full time. So you find that most of the children, especially the young girls, were finding school as a safe haven from a lot of things that were happening at home. That is why when the lockdown was imposed, 3 months into the lockdown, teenage pregnancies increased, because now children were brought closer to their abusers, because the abusers are not so far from them. The abusers are the uncles, the abusers are the neighbors, some of the dads' abusers. So if we find that teenage pregnancies increased because children were brought closer to their abusers when the lockdown was imposed. That was starting from around 22nd March last year. And then also gender-based violence increased in very many homes. But then remember I told you that we have laws. However, institutions were coming up to protect these laws, but the pandemic hindered them because different organizations used to carry out community dialogues. But then community dialogues could not be held anymore because of the social distancing measures. Different institutions and even some of the government institutions could carry out focus group discussions to enlighten different communities about the dangers maybe of gender-based violence, but this could not happen anymore because of the social distancing restrictions. So the pandemic has really affected women's rights. So we also find that when gender-based violence increased, because women were at home, and we know that most of the perpetrators of gender-based violence are the men, and women and girls, most of them are the victims. So because these people could not spend a lot of time together, they found out a lot of things from each other, because the more time you spend with someone is when you find out. So when they found out some of the issues, maybe the behaviors that they could not contain in case they were staying together, so these people could end up fighting. And then even after the fights, it could be hard for a woman to go and report, because public transport was limited. Like public transport was limited, and now imagine being beaten, and then you have to go to report to the police. But because of the lockdown measures, the husbands usually ask them, "Where are you going?" And then they ended up being victims over and over again because they could not even report anywhere. Some areas have gender-based violence shelters whereby they look after victims of gender-based violence. However, these areas were inaccessible because of the lockdown measures. So also there's a lot of child marriages that increased because parents usually use this as a way of let me say getting rich, because when they give in their daughters into child marriage, they are given dowry. So some of them look at it as a way of becoming rich. Then also we realize that besides the teenage pregnancies, also pregnancies among the grown-ups increased because of still the stock, like transport was so hard for the people, and then there's a lot of drug stockouts. People could not easily access contraceptives. So because of this, even those who never wanted to get pregnant ended up getting pregnant because of the lockdown, because of the drug stockouts. And this happens because the supply chain of maybe the contraceptives, the condoms, most of the injectables and tabs that people use to hinder unintended pregnancies, they were all hindered because of the transport means that were put on lockdown. Yes, that is how the pandemic kind of affected women's rights and their sexual and reproductive health. So just a little bit of before I proceed, and as I'm still talking about the pandemic and how it affected rights of the women. So some of the teenage pregnancies that increased in Uganda were not after someone has been raped or defiled. Some of the girls really gave in themselves. Because they are locked down for more than 3 months, they realized that they had no future back to school. What happened? Most of them ended up having risky sexual behaviors with age mates. For instance, during the lockdown last year, I happened to move around because I was working with a health institution. So these were regarded as essential workers. So for them, they could move to different places, maybe to provide support. So I interacted with a young girl in a place called Arua in West Nile, Uganda. So this girl told me that I found her pregnant. I found her at a health facility. I found her at a hospital called Pakwach Regional Hospital. This young girl told me that she was around 15, but she told me that her pregnancy was, she decided to have it because the parents could not provide for her certain things that they wanted. She gave me an example of clothes because she was the last born in their family. Most of the clothes that she used to put on were from the elder siblings. So she told me that there is this young man who had also returned to the village because he was at the university, because the university was also closed. So when they met up, this young boy was able to buy this girl a dress. So the girl told me that my parents have never bought any new clothes for me. So if this boy bought for me a new cloth and he wants sex, I'll give it to him. And unfortunately, the first attempt for this, because she had never had sex before, the first attempt of her having sex, she became pregnant. And when I asked her about going back to school, because it was still lockdown, she was like, she's not sure about going back to school. So some of these things were brought because of information flow was so low, and then the government focused more on COVID-19 prevention. The government focused more on the COVID-19 prevention, and then they forgot that Ugandans were facing some other issues. They are facing some other problems before the pandemic came in. So when the COVID-19 task force was put into place to prevent the pandemic, all the attention, even the health workers that were helping out young people, the health workers were in the youth-friendly corners. All of them diverted their energies to prevent COVID-19, and that is why we see that these sexual reproductive health and rights issues increased, the teenage pregnancy, the child marriages, and so on and so forth. Yes. Next slide. Yes. Because we do not have to rant a lot about what is happening. These are some of the things that I think can be done to ensure that women's rights are respected. One of the things that should be done is promoting easy access to family planning, especially for young girls and young women. So family planning has been packaged in a way that society is finding it so hard to take it up. For instance, when they see maybe a girl, maybe an 18-year-old going to seek information or about contraceptive, they think that this child is so immoral. However, if we can create an enabling environment that can increase access to family planning, we can find that girls are not deprived of their education, because most of the girls who get pregnant as teenagers, they usually drop out of school and find it so hard to go back to school because families usually neglect them. They are tagged as spoiled children in the different communities that they belong to. Also, I think promotion of saving cooperatives, because we find that the vulnerability of the young women and girls has been mainly because they are not financially stable. So if we put in place the savings cooperatives among that can support women, their rights will really be represented, because the financially stable women, at least we have seen many of them standing up for their rights, and also those who have gone to school, their education can also improve on how they can stand up and defend their rights. So illiteracy is also an issue that is hindering women's rights from being represented. So, and then we also have a lot of gender stereotypes and norms. Those who started with me heard me talking about how we have a lot of patriarchy in Uganda, and then the cultures do not facilitate space for women. So we find that the government has gone ahead to put in place laws. They're going ahead to put in place the laws that protect women. However, because of culture, these laws have been thrown below the bus. For instance, what are the example that I gave to you? However, if we provide equal opportunities for both men and women, for instance, now in the government, we recently had elections, and we find that we have in the cabinet we have more women compared to the previous years. So we believe in these 5 years that are coming, women's rights should be protected more. Then also, at least we have seen each district in Uganda has a woman representative. So we believe that the women representative can stand up for the women's rights. Also, the government has put in place some of the initiatives like Emyoga, which is aimed at financially supporting women. Emyoga is it's more like they get groups of people, both women and men. You can get a group. You just create a group in their respective area of residencies. Then you come up with a business proposal. Then you submit it, and then the government gives you funds. However, it has not been so effective, this Emyoga initiative, because of some of mismanagement of funds. But it was put in place, and some people have really benefited from this Emyoga scheme. Yes, next slide as I conclude. Yes, some of the call to action is provide equal support to both rural and women in urban, to support women both in rural and urban areas. Also equipping girls with climate adaptive skills. So also empowering initiatives for women, review and changing policies. So we realize that policies are already existing, policies that protect women. However, there are some changes that need to be made, because some of these policies, as they are being drafted, they used a top-down approach instead of a bottom-up approach. So some of these people did not carry out enough research. They just thought for the people. So what they need to do right now is going to carry out ground research to ensure that the policies are made according to the issues that are affecting women, not just thinking that this issue is affected by women. I've seen someone asking what is SRHR. I've been mentioning it before. It is sexual reproductive health and rights. Yeah. So we also need to inform the government about what is really happening on ground, because most of their approaches are top down. For instance, some of the areas, some of the women in rural areas are facing, let's say, they might be facing, let's say they're facing a lot of fistula because of the services at the facilities. But then you find that instead of finding a solution of fistula, the government is providing mosquito nets, yet the area doesn't have a lot of malaria problems. So this happens because of the top-down approach that they use. They do not go on ground to find out what is really happening on ground, but then they just come up with solutions, and they think that they just suspect that these guys might be facing such an issue, so let's provide them with this solution. Yet what is on ground is kind of different. Then another example, in the Karamoja region, they have ever built hospitals there. But then people in Karamoja say that our issue is not hospital. They're not hospitals. Our issue is access to clean water. Our issue is some of them were facing a lot of conflicts at the border. So mainly the solutions that are being provided, these people are not doing a ground research. So if they carry out a ground research to find out what exactly these people are facing, it will be so good for the country. Next slide. I think that is the last one. Yeah. You can follow Transition Earth on Twitter and Facebook. Also, check out our website, transitionearth.org. Thank you so much. I will welcome questions.
Thank you, Joshua. That was great I think it's really important that you provided that perspective of Uganda's policies regarding, sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now we're going to hear from Karen on her work with the Maasai Harmonial project. Again, we will be having a Q&A session once the presentations wrap up. So keep dropping those questions in the chat box. Karen, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, the floor is now yours.
Okay. Maasai Harmonial Development and Sustainability is a community-based organization recognized by the government of Tanzania. Our focus is girls' education and women's health. Next slide. Our community is located in the Imbobo Depression in Ngorongoro Conservation Area in Tanzania. The Serengeti is next door on the left, Kenya is in the north, and Mount Kilimanjaro is on the right. Because of our next slide. It's going to take me a while to get used to saying next slide.
No
Next
worries.
slide. This does not show everything on my screen. The slides are abbreviated. They're not fully shown. Is there a way to make that bigger?
I don't think so. I apologize.
I got it now. There it is.
Okay, great.
My problem. So this is just a satellite showing the population density, which I'm using to make a point later on. Next slide. This is the Ngorongoro crater. We're at the viewpoint, and it's a world famous crater full of wildlife. And this is Mapena, who is a member of our team, and he's a rhino ranger. By that, next slide. Here he is tending an injured rhino. Next slide. Oh, looks different than, this looks quite different than the slide. It's kind of messed it up. In fact, I can't read it. Let me see. Here we go. Because of their expertise in management and conservation of resources for wildlife and livestock, the Maasai ecosystem is home to spectacular assemblages of African wildlife populations. About 25,000 large animals are found in the Ngorongoro crater, which contains the largest density of mammalian predators in Africa: lions, wild dog, cheetah, and hyena. Also, it has endangered black rhino, elephants, elands, gazelles, and other antelope, hippos, and elephant. Ngorongoro is the calving grounds for over 1 million wildebeest of the Great Serengeti Mara ecosystem. This is in contrast to most of the rest of the world, where the average size of wildlife populations has plummeted more than 2/3 in less than 50 years, according to the World Wildlife Federation. Next slide. Here's a typical homestead scene. Again, low population density. Next slide. Humans and wildlife live together. Maasai can live with wild animals, but tourists can't. Next slide. The Maasai even take care of baby giraffes from time to time. Next slide. Zebras can graze with cows and wildebeest, but cows get a disease from the wildebeest. Next slide. Ngorongoro wildebeest live in the crater and stay in the crater, but Maasai people are not allowed to live there or graze their cattle there. Next slide. Next slide.
Sorry, it looks like it's lagging. There we go.
In 1975, the Maasai were evicted from the Ngorongoro crater. Next slide. The crater is only a small part of the Ngorongoro conservation area. In the crater are hordes of tourists, large assemblages of wild animals, and no livestock and no houses. In the rest of the Ngorongoro conservation area are indigenous people, cattle, sheep, goats, and wild animals. Next slide. In February 2016, my partner, Ben Parks, went to Tanzania to visit Mapena, a former student that Ben sponsored in Wildlife College. Mapena is a Maasai whose family lives in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. When Ben arrived at Mapena's village, they had a big ceremony and most of the village turned out. The village elders presented Ben with a list of their challenges, and a woman stood and asked for family planning, which was much to my amazement. Next slide. Our challenges include education, poverty, healthcare, food problems, cattle disease, and water problem. Next slide. Here's a typical picture of women dressed for a ceremony in all their finery. Next slide. Now, will we be able to play this video? Let's see if oh, we went past the video. We went past 2 slides. Is the video available?
Let's see. Oh, it takes me to YouTube.
Okay. Stop the video about halfway through it because we don't need to see the whole video.
Oh, goodness. Okay, next slide.
No, the video didn't play.
Oh, no, it played. I played it for halfway.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Oh.
Did anybody else see it?
Well, I guess I don't think I can.
No one saw it.
Okay.
Oh, darn.
I'll be sure.
Video's a good part of the thing. Okay, maybe we can have time to play the videos at the end.
Definitely. And I will include them in a wrap-up email in case we don't get to them, okay?
All right.
Because it really is a good video.
Yeah, and it shows these girls how this is what they do. This is part of becoming a woman, is wearing these necklaces, and they're joining the community in these outfits, basically. And they're very happy to be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next slide. Hey, hang on, I gotta move this thing in the way. It's not gonna go away. Child brides are married to older men child brides who are married to older men lack the negotiation skills and the confidence to assert their needs to their husbands. Next slide. They are isolated and vulnerable. Even where family planning services are available, young brides are difficult to reach with such support. Next slide. 90% of girls, adolescent girls in the developing world occur within a marriage or union. Married adolescents have the lowest use of contraception and the highest levels of unmet need. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth are the leading cause of death to girls 15 to 19. Next slide. With no reduction in child marriage, high fertility rates alone will raise the global number of women married as children to 1.2 billion by 2050. Next slide. Drawdown.org gives us 100 solutions to reverse global warming. In the top 10 are girls' education combined with family planning, which will result in 8 gigatons fewer carbon emissions. Next slide. Thanks to Population Connection for being the first population organization to make a strong connection between population and girls' education. This is from the recent magazine. Next slide. The developing world is catching up on emissions. Africa has approximately the same population as India, but Africa's population is expected to double by 2050, 2.4 billion. This will double the amount of Africa's emissions, increasing it to 2,600 metric tons of CO2 if per capita consumption remains the same. However, per capita carbon emissions in the least developed countries have tripled from 1960 to 2014, and for India, they have increased 6-fold. This means Africa's per capita emissions would double or quadruple by 2050, totaling 5,200 to 10,400 metric tons of CO2, which is about where the US is now, at the bottom number. Next slide. It is education, or more specifically, girls' education, that is far more likely to result in lower carbon emissions than a shift to renewables, improved agricultural practices, or any other strategy now being contemplated. The difference between 0 years of schooling and 12 years is almost 4 to 5 children per woman. Next slide. 46 billion more is needed for education and family planning. 39 billion is for education. The other part of it is a little bit unknown because the numbers have changed since the global gag rule. Next slide. How successful have we been in curtailing consumption? Next slide. Language barrier. Only 10% of Tanzanians speak Swahili, the national language, as their native tongue. This barrier keeps most pastoral students from entering secondary school. Such barriers exist in many remote areas of the developing world where fertility rates are the highest. Only 50% of students pass the national exam to get into high school, where classes are taught in English. These girls failed their national exam, so they went to a special school that caught them up in English so they could continue with their education. Most parents cannot afford the annual cost of $500 to send their girls to school. Next slide. In preschool, kids learn Swahili as a second language. Without preschool, success in primary school is difficult, and passing the exam to get into secondary school is rare. Here's our new classroom. After this classroom was built, we had 120 preschool kids in a classroom built for 45. This is a government classroom. Next slide. We serve porridge for preschool lunch because a child learns better with food in her stomach. It costs $300 a month to send 120 kids lunch, which is about $250 per child per month. And the reason I'm mentioning these numbers is I am asking for money to fund this project. Next slide. There's another video here. I guess we can see afterwards if we can't play it now. But this is a woman giving phonics lessons to the preschoolers. She's a preschool teacher, and we pay her $75 a month. Next slide. This is the former preschool classroom. The teacher doesn't even have a chalkboard to use. There's about 35 to 40 kids taking this class. Next slide. To encourage more kids and thus more girls, we bought uniforms for preschool and primary students. In addition, the older primary kids started going to a boarding school. A uniform cost $28 each. Next slide. Younger primary kids are too young to go to boarding school. 85 of them walk to and from school 8 miles every day. They need 2 new classrooms near their community. Next slide. Here they are walking at sunrise 4 miles to school. Next slide. Also, these students sometimes have to walk in rainy, cold weather, so we bought them rain boots and warm sweaters. Next slide. When early primary students walk to school, there are aggressive wild animals on the way. This affects how many girls go to primary school and beyond. If you look at the class 1 numbers of our students, there's 38 boys and only 10 girls. Whereas in preschool, there were 45 boys to 40 girls. Next slide. We found this $5,000 classroom in another area. Granted, it's not as good as the one that the government built, but it still only costs $5,000 compared to $16,000, and it will last maybe 10 years. But can they get a permit to build this school? Permits are being refused due to threat of eviction of the Maasai from the Ngorongoro area. Next slide. Secondary students are off to schools far away in this picture. A journey of 2 nights at the cost of $80 per trip with 3 school breaks a year. Few parents can afford this. Plus there's other costs in buying mattresses and things that they have to take to school with them. Next slide. Menstrual pads keep girls in school. Without pads, girls miss school 4 to 5 days a month. Also, menstrual pads keep girls from getting pregnant because then they don't have to ask their boyfriends for money to buy pads. $431 would help 100 girls stay in school. That's a pretty good bargain. Next slide. We have 4 girls in college. Next slide. When our partner organization built preschools near the communities, children started learning Swahili prior to going to primary school. The pass rate from primary to secondary school increased from 10% to 67.5% from 2011 to 2016. This year, our primary grade 7 girl students have taken mock exams for high school. And our students have the highest score in their class, and they have been selected as student leaders, both boys and girls. Next slide. We made a family planning video in 2016 and a girls' puberty video narrated by Grace, our medical student, who is now a doctor. Grace is also now our health educator, except she's taken a year to go take another year in medical school. Next slide. The family planning video was a success. The video was shown in our community and neighboring villages. In 2016, when Marie Stopes came with her mobile family planning clinic, 13 women from our community plus 10 women from nearby villages walked 4 miles to get family planning methods. However, just recently, the UK government cut $18 million promised to Marie Stopes. Next slide. We beefed up the health clinic. We bought family planning equipment and supplies. The doctor received family planning training. Other organizations added a delivery table, maternity ward, and ambulance. And the Clinton Foundation provided a solar-powered refrigerator for vaccines. The use of family planning methods doubled from 24% to 52% between late 2016 and late 2017. Next slide. In 2020, I discovered that the use of family planning had dropped to 13%. On investigation, I found that the doctor had retired and the new doctor did not speak the Ma language. So we hired these 2 women who spoke Swahili to become medical interpreters. Next slide. Common or potential barriers to family planning success. Language difference between patient and provider, remote location, lack of basic education, lack of information and or superstition about family planning methods, home births, no opportunity for education from the doctor, long distance from community to the hospital, failure to take a sick baby to the doctor, lack of family planning for the doctor, lack of family planning training for the doctor, lack of family planning methods, supplies, or equipment, pressure from the husband or community to produce babies, racial prejudice on the part of the medical personnel who treat the patient badly, and suspicion that the doctor is a eugenicist. Next slide. In health class, topics are family planning, maternal health, HIV. HIV is very necessary, it's a problem. Child marriage, birth spacing, and FGM and sex ed in school. Next slide. Here's our happy health class with Grace in the front. Next slide. This is another video, which is not showing. So we had some women's representatives, and I hope you get to see this video because it's a woman giving testimony to our girls' education and anti-FGM programs. And I hope you get a chance to see this video in particular. Next slide. There it is. Okay, and there's another video in here. This is our annual celebration, which we've had 2 years now. It's in January or February or January or December. And the basic message is allow girls to go to school and stop FGM. And the video that's missing from this one has 2 rows of girls. The one row are girls who are going to school, and the other row is they're pretending to be girls who did not go to school. And one side are boasting about the advantages of going to school, and the other side is saying, I feel sorry that I'm not going to school. And it's really quite funny because some of the things the girls say that I'm going to marry a rich man and blah, blah, blah. You know, anyway, people are laughing during the video. So I hope you get to see that video as well. Next slide. Oh, that finally came on. I wonder if it would play. Probably not. Okay, next slide. Now we got a picture that should show up on this one. There it is. Okay, that's another video. These are women getting maize that I had to provide, which is costly. You know, it takes away from money that I can send girls to school with. So on malnutrition, infant mortality, and population growth. Next slide. 2017. Wait a minute, this thing is in the way. 2017 was a drought year. We had to buy maize for those who were poor. On top of that, Ngorongoro residents are not allowed to cultivate subsistence crops. They were supposed to get food subsidies, but they don't get them anymore. Next slide. When women are malnourished, they produce less breast milk. This has 3 effects. Breast milk is a contraceptive, and when it stops, women become fertile again. Babies become malnourished. When babies die, women want to have more babies to ensure against infant loss. Maasai women don't name their babies until 3 months of age due to high infant deaths. FGM also contributes to infant mortality because the opening to the mother's womb is narrowed, so they eat less food to have an easier birth. This slide, some of these slides are kind of messed up, like the numbers on the 3 effects are messed up. But anyway, next slide. The higher the infant mortality, the higher the number of children born, according to this chart. Next slide. In November 2020, we bought sheep and goats, enough so that everyone has at least 3 sheep and goats. This was to supplement their maize diet. Several months later, the sheep and goats are having babies, and a sheep or goat cost $30. Next slide. We also have women's crafts and livelihood, but COVID messed that up because the tourist market went away during COVID. I don't know if you know that Tanzania basically ignored COVID, but the tourists did not. And we still don't know how many people had COVID or have COVID in Tanzania, but the new president is doing better on that. Next slide. Here are some pictures of the women who sew, making midwife aprons. Next slide. So another thing that we're trying to do is provide full efficient stoves for families. The stoves are $75 each. Maasai stoves use less wood, less time carrying wood home. They take less time to carry wood home. There's less indoor smoke pollution and fewer children tripping on the fire and burning themselves because these stoves are up against the wall instead of out in the middle. Pneumonia and respiratory illnesses are the #1 health problem for women in this area. Pneumonia is a common cause of infant death. 2 of the 3 girls that I first sent to secondary school got pneumonia when they came home from school, and 1 of them died. Next slide. We also have a program for men that teaches men and women should have equal voice in family decisions. It's called Secure Your Family Future. Next slide. Tourism and eviction. In this picture, the tourist vehicles seem to outnumber the wild animals. Next picture. Next picture. And next picture. And next picture. Who has the biggest footprint, Maasai or tourist? Next picture. Next picture.
On TV now.
Next picture. Maasai residents have Maasai residents' livestock watering holes are restricted while resorts fill up their swimming pools. And I can't read all of that because it's obscured by the all the tools on the bottom. Next. Maasai used to burn noxious weeds like this. The authorities refused to do so. These cattle are starving. They're not getting enough. The bushy plants are ones that they can't eat. They won't eat them. That donkeys might eat them, but cattle and zebras, which you can see in the background, are not eating them. The zebras are allowed, however, to go where cattle can't go. Next slide. The Native Americans used to set fires to control vegetation to conserve grasslands, and so did the Maasai. Next slide. There are invasive weeds in the Ngorongoro crater. On the right, you can see the salmon colored area is the weed infested area. Ngorongoro is the jewel of the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. It is the main attraction of nearly all Ngorongoro tourism. The NC Authority equates the degradation of the range with a tipping point, blaming it on the population of the pastoralists. I'm kind of sensitive to the word tipping point now. Dr. Nogel says it's unfair that government and other bodies blame the pastoralists for invasive plants since they have not been in there for over 45 years. And also there are many roads that are destroying the crater. Next slide. The Maasai got the blame for having these modern houses, but they belong to the Ngorongoro authorities and the tourism employees and retirees. Next slide. In December 2020, in the allafrica.com website, there was an article that said Ngorongoro was at a tipping point as population soars. We had a new president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, in March. And in April, this president nailed it on the Ngorongoro tipping point, saying soaring human population jeopardizes the wildlife in the world's greatest unbroken caldera. These slides are still kind of messed up compared to what I was showing. 6 days after the president's statement, the authority published a document that would evict certain illegal immigrants while hundreds of others were required to demolish buildings, including government primary schools, health centers, police stations, churches, mosques, and private homes. In April, the Maasai held a press conference, which, by the way, I helped fund. They appealed the eviction order. And on April 20th, the eviction was called off. They halted the plans to evict hundreds of Maasai. Next slide. I'm not going to read all this, but the Maasai's had things to say. I will say that the number 1,000 was supposed to be was supposed to signify that there was a tipping point, whereas actually a tipping point wouldn't be reached until they reached 200,000, and yet it wasn't really 100,000 people. It was more like 60,000 people that were there because 40,000 were, quote, immigrants, and immigrants is really the authority, tourism employees and retirees and staff of schools, churches, and NGOs living there. So next slide. So since the eviction has been called off, maybe there is hope for this classroom after all. Maybe the preschool kids won't have to walk so far to school. Maybe more girls can go to school. But the danger is not over. They have been threatened with eviction attempts to force them to leave for many years. Next slide. Education in Ngorongoro conservation is extremely insufficient. Healthcare is sadly lacking. Cattle are restricted, subsidized grain has ended, no cultivation is allowed, pasture is degraded, right to food is gone. Although social services were promised the Maasai, they are sadly underfunded with little or no profit from tourism going to the residents. These things are needed to slow population growth. If the authorities had provided the things that they had promised, starting when they forced the Maasai to leave the Serengeti and move into a much smaller area, then there would be no problem with population. However, there is no guarantee that that would be the end of colonial control over the Maasai. Next slide. From the Special Rapporteur's statement about biodiversity and indigenous people. Indigenous knowledge is vital to saving the world's biodiversity and consequently to humanity's future. It finds that lands managed by indigenous peoples and local communities experience less biodiversity loss than other lands. About 80% of all the world's biodiversity is located on indigenous lands. At least 40 to 50% of protected areas have been established on lands traditionally occupied or used by indigenous people with devastating consequences. Next slide. So email me for a repeat of this presentation in a Q&A on June 30th if you want to come back and see this show again on June 30th. Also, you can see the slideshow using a link from the web provided by Population Connection on their website. And one more slide, I think. Okay, some more links, but you can, again, you can see them on the Population Connection website.
Yes, and we will drop those in the chat box shortly, Karen.
Yeah, there should be a video on this one too, if you want to see that one, but we'll have to come back for that.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it plays. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karen. And thank you everyone for being patient with us as we figured out those technical difficulties. We are over time, but our speakers are more than happy to stay for the Q&A session. We do have several questions lined up. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into the Q&A session. All right. So it looks like, Karen, you could probably answer this one. Which methodologies did you find particularly effective or ineffective when trying to introduce the idea of contraceptives or family planning in these traditional cultural contexts?
Well, for us, it was quite easy because number one, they had been threatened about their population before. So they were tuned into the fact that they had to control their population, even though it was unfair, they were unfairly accused of it. And so the Mapana, the people on our team that first had promoted our organization were all for it, but on the other hand, the actual community still had patriarchal views and everything. However, when we produced the video that explained about the benefits and side effects and everything they needed to know about contraception and family planning methods, that worked. That education worked, and we had the midwives had tablets where these videos could be seen. So and that worked very well. Like I said, it got the contraceptive rate up to 54%.
That's great. That is great to hear. Thank you. The next question, I guess either of you can answer on this. Maybe Joshua might touch on it a little more. Is it important to discuss family planning and SRHR differently with women and men? Do we need different gender-specific approaches?
Is that mine?
Yeah, if you could go ahead and touch on it, either of you can really answer.
Yeah, okay. Over time, it has been easy to discuss women issues separately and then putting men separately to discuss these issues because of like what I earlier said. For instance, if you are going to like rural areas, there's a lot of patriarchy. Patriarchy is so strong, so sometimes men don't want to share space with women, or even in case they're in the same space, you find that men sit on chairs and women sit on the floor. So yes. So basically, and then some of the women fear to say certain things when their husbands are seeing them, because there are certain things that they are going through. For instance, some men do not want women to enroll on family planning, and then you find that giving birth to a lot of kids, majorly, like what I during my presentation earlier, I say that it mainly affects the women because it weakens their bodies because of the various pregnancies that you're going through, and then it also levies the burden of looking after the children. So sometimes when we're discussing sexual and reproductive health, sometimes it's good to separate the two. However, nowadays, men are starting to embrace the fact that women also have rights. They can stand up and speak. So that is why nowadays there's many institutions and especially many non-government organizations are having something called the gender mainstreaming. So gender mainstreaming, whereby they're teaching young boys from childhood to respect women's rights. So boys and men. So, and this is done through community dialogues, and then in these community dialogues, women are also present, and it's also done through focus group discussions. So they get women and men, and then together, and then they are discussing ways how they can help each other. However, in the start, it was a bit so hard, but as time goes by, behavior change is being addressed, and then we are seeing dynamics that are happening within men. I don't know if I've answered.
No, definitely. And that ties in well to the next question. So what is the current trend in contraceptive use in Uganda for men and women? I guess maybe talk about what methods are used. I guess, Karen, you could talk about this as well, since you were there in that village and with the Marie Stopes Mobile Clinic, maybe touch on some of those contraceptive options.
Well, number one, because they have FGM, all of women have that experience. They can't use IUDs, but also it's a matter of sanitation, hygiene. So they can't use that device. They most common one, I think, is the pill and the injection. Now, these are usually available, but I have not checked since COVID. I suspect that they're not, and also because of the gag rule, I've not checked to see how available they still are, and I need to do that. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
No, that definitely answered the question. And what about for men? Could Ugandan men be convinced that vasectomies are safe and effective, or is it more about, education and awareness?
I have not tried at convincing men. I know that men are they want to have babies. That's the patriarchal view, and I haven't attempted to convince men yet.
Okay.
And I know also men will beat their wives if they know they have contraception. So a lot of women are taking it without their husband's permission.
Okay.
When I first started, I sent 10 women to a FAME hospital where they had family planning classes. And I thought that the women would take family planning there, but they didn't, because the husbands knew that they had gone there and would get suspicious that they would get contraception. But in the village, they can walk 4 miles to the nearest town or to the health facility, and the husband is not suspicious because she goes to the market there anyway.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Okay.
mostly a lot of times it's on the sly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understood. Joshua, I just wanted to give you a chance to add in anything if you wanted to our, you could provide that male perspective.
Yeah, just like Karen,
Okay.
it's not so different from us, but having many children is prestigious in Uganda. However much as time goes by, because of the standards of living, and it's changing a bit because standards of living are becoming so high. However, in the areas where you find someone has maybe a huge chunk of land, we have a lot of polygamous families. So you find a man is having more than one woman, and it is okay. So the uptake of contraceptives is not so big. For instance, okay, the last research that was carried out in Uganda, it was by Uganda It was a Uganda Demographic and Health Survey of 2016. It indicated that 30% of women, 30% of women and 39.9% of men in reproductive age were using contraceptives. So it showed that more men were using contraceptives than women. The Uganda Demographic Survey of 2016 was the last research that was carried out over Uganda. But then it shows that there's a 13.4 increase of women in the uptake of contraceptives and a 20% of men, 20% increase of men in the uptake of contraceptives. However, men in Uganda don't have a wide range of contraceptives that they use, or family planning methods, because basically most use condoms and vasectomy. A few of them go for vasectomy. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for touching on that. The next question, what is the average number of children in Uganda? Do the women want to have more children? Either of you can touch on that one.
Okay, in Uganda, around 78% of people are below 30 years. So the biggest population of Uganda is below 30 years. But you find that in most cases, women are not the ones who determine the number of children that they want. In most cases, it is most times the man decides the amount of children that he wants. That is why earlier on I told you that in some communities, when we're engaging with some of the women in communities, we find that some of them tell us that they don't want to maybe use condoms because their partners will suspect. So having live sex in some communities in Uganda, in very many communities in Uganda, is a sign of trust. So when a woman suggests to a man that maybe we use a condom, the woman might be looking at herself, maybe not wanting to give birth, but because live sex is seen as a sign of trust, the man will say, so does it mean that you don't trust me? Yeah, because condoms are usually related to stopping the spread of HIV. Yes. Yeah, something like so. Some women, at some point they're not willing to have children, but circumstances push them to the wall, and then they end up giving birth. That is why, many of them. And then sometimes you find that if a man finds out that maybe a woman has been having maybe an IUD, or the woman has been taking pills that deter her from getting pregnant. These are some of the causes of gender-based violence. because some women do it without the knowledge of men because they know that the men won't accept. Yes.
Anything to add, Karen, before we move on to the next question?
No, actually, I focus more on girls' education because when they reach puberty and beyond, my goal is to have them educated to the point where they know how to prevent pregnancy, and they value their education and they want to use that education to have a life that doesn't involve a whole bunch of kids, basically. Yeah.
That's a great point. That will lead me into the next question. And since we are very past our time limit, we're going to make this the final question. But any questions that we didn't get to, Karen is more than happy to answer, and we will email everyone her responses, and of course send all of the wonderful links to extra resources and the videos we unfortunately did not get to see. So for our final question today, most girls who get pregnant are denied a right to go back to school. Is there a way these teenage mothers could be supported to finish school?
You want me to answer that? Or Josh?
Either.
Let Josh go ahead.
Okay. So many of them stopped from going back to school because they assume that they will spoil those who did not get pregnant. However, because of the outrageous increase of teenage pregnancies last year, after when the lockdown was eased a bit, and then schools were reopened, the government allowed pregnant girls to go back to school because the numbers were so huge, and then they could not just let them stay at home because maybe they are pregnant. So they allowed them. However, over the years, there has always been a debate, even in some of the universities, the Christian-founded universities, they used not to allow pregnant girls girls to attend classes with their pregnancies. However, things are kind of changing. So yes, that is what happened last year. Girls were allowed to go back with pregnancies, and then supporting teenage mothers. Some NGOs, there is one non-government organization called Restless Development. It's what I've been familiarized with. They support the teenage mothers, and basically they build their capacity and train them to do some skills that can help them earn some money, because most of the teenage mothers are usually abandoned by the people who made them pregnant. So some of them are being supported in that way. Some of them receive free health care. Of course, this has been provided by both the government and some non-government organizations. Yeah, and then others are receiving packages from non-government organizations that can enable them sail through, especially that bit of after child delivery, when their health is still at risk of contracting certain illnesses. Yes.
I can answer that too if you have time.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's illegal to girls are not allowed to come back to school if they're pregnant. Unfortunately, in Tanzania, maybe the new president will change that, because that's really unfortunate. But what's nice about it, having a baby in a Maasai community, is the baby will be taken care of by somebody in the community. That's usually not a problem. So, but I guess that's all I have to say. It's not a problem, and if the government would loosen up, then it would be great. So.
Okay. So there are some resources out there for women who get pregnant before finishing school. Thank you both for touching on that. That's going to wrap up presentation for today. Thank you everyone for joining us, for staying with us as we learn about our speakers' incredible work. A big thank you to Karen and Joshua for sharing that with us. And we will be in touch in the next couple of days with the presentation recording, the slides, so you can check out those videos we didn't get to see today, and additional resources that Karen so graciously would like to share with us. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.